The first time I felt truly alive again from a man's touch, it came in the most unexpected way, through my son. I know that sounds shocking, and it's not what you think. It wasn't some dramatic outburst or a hidden confession whispered in the dark. It happened quietly, under the harsh heat of a summer sun, in a moment so brief and strange it rearranged the way I saw my life. You might be ready to judge, to label me a monster in some twisted family tragedy, but before you do, I want you to really hear me. Step inside the quiet, picture-perfect home where I lived, a house that looked ideal from the outside, but inside, I was a ghost. Maybe you've felt that way too, without ever saying it out loud. Our home sat neatly on a street lined with smiles and trimmed lawns. To the world, we were everything right, a loving couple, a successful family. My husband Marcus was a lawyer who never stopped working. I was Clara, the devoted mother and housewife, the calm behind the scenes. Our son Ethan had just come home from college, bright, kind, the golden boy. But behind the polished image, I was the one hiding the truth, the quiet rot eating away at everything we built. Every inch of our beautiful home was for show, a stage no one truly lived on. The shiny floors, the expensive furniture, the paintings on the wall, they were all props in a play that had long lost its meaning. Marcus was no longer a husband. He was a shadow in a business suit, more of a presence in the form of text messages and passing kisses than a real partner. His love was robotic, detached, a ritual without feeling. I became another part of the household machine, as unnoticed as the coffee maker he used every morning. My loneliness was no longer sadness, it had become the air I breathed. No amount of gardening or baking could chase away the cold that had settled deep in my bones. The day everything began to shift started like any other, with a heat wave hanging heavy over the house. The kind of thick, humid heat that makes it hard to even think. Marcus, as always, was tied up with work, his voice soft and distant over the phone. I'm slammed, Clara. We'll do something this weekend. It was the same promise I'd heard too many times. And so, it was just Ethan and me in that wide, quiet house, two people drifting past each other in silence. I needed to get out, to escape the heavy stillness pressing down on everything. That's when I suggested we drive out to Serpent's Cove. Serpent's Cove was full of memories, most of them faded now, of a younger Marcus who used to laugh easily, and a little boy who once built crooked sandcastles with bright, curious eyes. As we drove there, silence settled between Ethan and me, not tense, just quiet and easy. He sat beside me, gazing out the window, lost in whatever music was playing in his ears. I glanced at him, noticing the sharp line of his jaw and the way his shoulders had broadened so suddenly, almost without warning. Just yesterday, it seemed, he was a little boy tugging on my hair. And now, here he was, a grown man with eyes that mirrored mine, standing at the edge of a future that would soon pull him away from me forever. The feeling that rose in my chest was strange, a mix of pride and fear so raw it took the air from my lungs. When we got to the cove, the sunlight was intense, pressing down on us like a warm, invisible blanket. We picked a quiet spot, slightly tucked away, and for a while, everything felt almost normal. We played frisbee, our laughter soft and scattered like wind-blown sand under the steady crashing of the waves. He told me about school, about a girl named Sarah, just a friend, he said, and about the uncertain road ahead. For a little while, I wasn't that hollow version of myself from Havenwood. I felt real. I felt like a mother again, sharing a summer afternoon with her son. But then came the moment that changed everything. I was lying on my stomach, stretched out on a thick beach towel, the sun heavy on my skin. I could feel the sting of too much heat beginning to rise across my back. I turned my head slightly and called out to him, my voice softened by the fabric beneath my face, Ethan, honey. Could you get my back with the sunscreen? I can't reach, I asked. It was the kind of ordinary request any mother might make, something I'd said dozens of times when he was younger. But the silence that followed wasn't the automatic, sure, of a child anymore. There was a pause, small, almost nothing, but it shifted something in the air between us. I felt the sand move slightly as he knelt behind me. The lotion was cold against my sun-warmed skin, making me flinch at first. But it was his touch that struck me harder. These weren't the clumsy little hands of the boy I used to guide and care for. These were the hands of a grown man, steady, careful, unexpectedly tender. He wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just helping. It was simple, innocent, and yet, as his hands moved slowly, spreading the lotion over my shoulders and down my back, something inside me stirred in a way I didn't expect. I had lived so long in emotional drought that even this small act of attention felt overwhelming. It was the first time in years that someone had really touched me with focus, with care, not out of duty, but presence. And in that moment, my heart latched onto it with a kind of desperation I hadn't realized I was carrying. With every smooth motion of his hand, something heavy bloomed inside me. Not desire, not confusion, just a recognition of how profoundly I'd been neglected. His fingers moved with patience, learning the lines of my back, the angles of my body, not with intention but with kindness. And it hit me then, so suddenly it hurt. My son, unknowingly, was standing in the emotional vacancy my husband had left behind. He didn't mean to, he didn't understand it, but he was the only one who made me feel seen anymore. His simple, genuine attention made something in me ache. Marcus had long ago stopped noticing me, stopped touching me with care, stopped listening. And somehow, this quiet moment on the beach, between mother and son, had crossed into something more emotionally charged than I ever intended. How did I get here? How had everything slipped so far that a basic, loving gesture felt this close to intimacy? The sounds of the world around us, families laughing, seagulls calling, blurred into background noise. Inside, I felt something vast and terrifying pulling me away from the version of myself I thought I still was. And the silence that now lingered between us wasn't just silence. It was full of something unnamed, something waiting. The silence between us wasn't ordinary. It was thick, full of emotions we hadn't dared name. Feelings too new and terrifying to be spoken aloud. I no longer felt the sun's warmth from earlier. Instead, I felt something burn inside me, a fire I hadn't even known I was searching for. Something had sparked at the beach, something forbidden, something I couldn't control. When we got back home, the shift in the air was undeniable. The house, usually stale with stillness, felt colder than ever. Marcus's car was already in the driveway. He was home, technically, but not really. His presence was just another part of the quiet emptiness that lived in our walls. There was no, "How was the beach?" No curiosity, no affection, just a half-hearted, "Hey," as he passed through the kitchen, loosening his tie, eyes still stuck on whatever he'd left behind at the office. That night, as we sat around the dinner table, the atmosphere was heavy. His voice filled the space, bragging about some courtroom win, but it didn't touch me. He wasn't speaking to me. He was performing, as if I were just part of the set design in his carefully managed life. I watched him and felt nothing. Just distance. So much distance it felt like I was watching a stranger from across a canyon, through the wrong end of a telescope. After dinner, I found myself standing in the kitchen, staring out but seeing nothing. My mind kept replaying the beach, his touch, the quiet connection, the warmth I had absorbed like a woman starving for something real. Shame twisted in my chest. Anger and confusion tangled with guilt. Who had I become? What kind of woman reaches for meaning in a moment that should have meant nothing at all? And then I turned, and saw him. Ethan was standing there in the doorway. Watching me, not with the casual glance of a son, but something else. Something more focused. His eyes didn't flinch. He had felt it too, that subtle shift in the air between us. And he hadn't forgotten. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in years, a deep awareness, a raw understanding, like he could see all the way into me. Before I could move or speak, he stepped closer, slow but certain. And then he reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. It was such a simple gesture. Barely anything, but it struck me like lightning. That small touch hit something buried deep inside. My breath caught. My heart didn't know what to do. His eyes held mine, and there it was, that quiet attention, that emotional depth Marcus hadn't offered in more than a decade. And I was frozen in place. All the years of loneliness. All the pain I had swallowed. All the fake smiles, the cold dinners, the ache of never being seen. It all collided into that single second, and everything I believed about who I was began to come undone. Something had broken inside me. Like a storm I'd kept bottled up for years had finally cracked open, and in its lightning, I saw truths I had worked so hard to bury. Guilt rushed in immediately. Shame too. I felt like I'd lit a match in a house soaked with gasoline, one I had built myself, brick by careful brick. My whole life, this picture-perfect existence, suddenly looked like a gilded cage. And I was the one who'd locked the door. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a siren, all of it pulled me back into the present. Ethan's face shifted. That quiet, watchful expression he'd been holding gave way to confusion. Deep, searching confusion. He had seen it, the crack in me. The fracture in the mask I had worn for so long. And now, we stood there in that terrible stillness, like two people standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into something dark and endless. I knew, painfully, clearly, that what was growing between us wasn't love. No, this wasn't something beautiful. It was something born of isolation, of two aching people who had no one else. We were reaching toward each other not out of desire, but out of desperation. What would you have done if the only tender touch you'd felt in a decade came from someone it never should have? Would you reject it, rip yourself away and destroy the only moment you've felt alive in years? Or would you just pause? Just for a second, just to remember what it felt like to matter. To be seen. The days after that moment were unbearable. The heat outside lingered, heavy and suffocating, like it was pressing down on us, locking us inside our house, and inside the weight of everything unsaid. Ethan barely spoke, but he watched me, always. Whether I was in the kitchen, reading in the living room, or watering the wilting flowers in the yard, I could feel his eyes. Not in a childish way, but in a way that knew too much. And I let it happen. I didn't look away. I didn't correct it. I soaked it in like it was proof that I was still alive, still worth noticing. We weren't speaking with words anymore. It was something else, a language made up of looks and silence and all the things we didn't dare say. Then Marcus announced he had to fly out again. A last-minute trip to Chicago for some urgent client emergency. I didn't even ask. His excuse was worn thin, almost laughable. I could see right through it to the truth underneath. He didn't care anymore. Maybe he never really did. When the front door shut behind him, the sound echoed like a final goodbye. The silence after that was louder than any fight we'd ever had. And then the thought came to me. A reckless, dangerous thought. The beach. Our beach. Maybe it was just an excuse to escape the walls of the house. Maybe it was something else entirely. I don't know. Maybe. God help me. It wasn't the moment itself that changed everything, it was what it revealed. The first time I felt truly alive in over a decade, it came in the most unexpected way. Not through grand gestures or declarations, but through a quiet shift. A crack in the life I had worked so hard to maintain. And it began on a scorching July afternoon, under the sun's indifferent gaze, in a house where silence spoke louder than any fight ever could. My name is Clara. To the world, I was the perfect wife and mother. Married to Marcus, an accomplished attorney who knew how to win every battle except the ones inside our home. Our son, Ethan, had returned for the summer from college, tall, kind, and unknowingly carrying the warmth I had been starved of for years. Our home in Havenwood was a postcard of success. Pristine white siding, carefully clipped hedges, and a front porch that smiled politely at passers-by. But inside, I was a ghost drifting through curated rooms and pre-scheduled smiles. Marcus was barely there, physically or emotionally. I had become another fixture in his perfectly ordered life. Useful, quiet, and easily overlooked. The day we went to Serpent's Cove was supposed to be a distraction from the heat. Just me and Ethan, a mother and son catching up on time lost to distance and growing up. The drive there was filled with silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just settled. I glanced over at him, this young man who once clung to my legs as a toddler and now filled the passenger seat with shoulders I didn't remember him having. It wasn't the moment itself that changed everything, it was what it revealed. The first time I felt truly alive in over a decade, it came in the most unexpected way. Not through grand gestures or declarations, but through a quiet shift. A crack in the life I had worked so hard to maintain. And it began on a scorching July afternoon, under the sun's indifferent gaze, in a house where silence spoke louder than any fight ever could. My name is Clara. To the world, I was the perfect wife and mother. Married to Marcus, an accomplished attorney who knew how to win every battle except the ones inside our home. Our son, Ethan, had returned for the summer from college, tall, kind, and unknowingly carrying the warmth I had been starved of for years. Our home in Havenwood was a postcard of success. Pristine white siding, carefully clipped hedges, and a front porch that smiled politely at passers-by. But inside, I was a ghost drifting through curated rooms and pre-scheduled smiles. Marcus was barely there, physically or emotionally. I had become another fixture in his perfectly ordered life. Useful, quiet, and easily overlooked. The day we went to Serpent's Cove was supposed to be a distraction from the heat. Just me and Ethan, a mother and son catching up on time lost to distance and growing up. The drive there was filled with silence that wasn't uncomfortable, just settled. I glanced over at him, this young man who once clung to my legs as a toddler and now filled the passenger seat with shoulders I didn't remember him having. At the beach, the illusion held, for a while. We talked about his classes, laughed over memories, and sat under the heavy sky like nothing had changed. But something had. A moment passed between us that felt off. Not wrong, not overt, just charged. I asked him to help with sunscreen on my back, a request I'd made countless times when he was younger. Only this time, something about the air shifted. His touch was gentle, careful, and unremarkable to anyone watching. But to me, starved for attention, touch, affection, it felt like recognition. Not as a woman being desired, but as a human being finally noticed. The realization hit harder than anything physical ever could. I miss being seen. That's all it took to shake my foundations. Not desire, not intention, just the echo of intimacy in an empty house and the weight of years lived in emotional exile. That evening, Marcus didn't ask how the beach was. He didn't even look up from his phone. I sat across from him at the dinner table, watching a man I no longer recognized, while replaying that afternoon over and over in my head. Ethan said little, but his eyes said more than I was prepared for: curiosity, maybe confusion, perhaps an echo of my own longing for connection. In the days that followed, the heat outside only amplified the tension inside. Not inappropriate, not spoken, but present. A weight in every glance, in every pause that lasted a second too long. When Marcus announced, yet again, that he'd be leaving for a client trip, the silence he left behind was louder than any goodbye. And somehow, I found myself suggesting we go back to the cove. It wasn't about escape anymore. It was about something I couldn't admit. I wanted to feel again. Something, anything, just enough to remind myself I was still alive. But when we returned to the beach, the line between clarity and confusion blurred even more. The gestures remained innocent, but the emotional current beneath them was undeniable. No words were exchanged, but the silence between us roared. I wasn't thinking about right or wrong. I was thinking about how numb I'd become, and how this, whatever it was, cut through the ice. We never crossed the line into anything physical or forbidden. But the emotional shift was enough to shake me to my core. I saw myself in a way I hadn't in years, lost, vulnerable, and deeply human. When people hear stories like mine, they look for scandal, for a villain, but what they rarely see is the slow erosion of a woman's sense of self, the silence that grows louder year after year until even a kind gesture feels like a lifeline. I never set out to feel this way. And I never wanted to drag Ethan into my loneliness. What happened wasn't an affair in the traditional sense. It was a reckoning, a mirror held up to the choices I'd made, the years I'd endured, and the emptiness I'd never dared to name. This isn't a story about desire. It's a story about emotional survival. And the high price of being forgotten in your own home. It was a potent, disorienting cocktail, exhilaration twisted with self-loathing. The sensation was so overwhelming it felt like I might come apart at the seams. All the emotions I had buried for so long, hardened into silence and routine, were erupting now, uncontained, unfiltered. Like a volcano long dormant, I couldn't stop the flow. In the barren landscape of my life, Ethan had become the only living spark. Not in a romantic sense, but in a human one. A light in a world where I'd grown used to dimness. And I was drawn to that brightness, to the warmth of being noticed, being regarded, like a woman again and not just someone's wife, someone's mother. I hated myself for it. Not because of what had happened, nothing explicitly had, but because of what I had allowed myself to feel. The need, the desperation, the terrifying vulnerability of wanting more than the boxed-in version of myself I had become. I turned my head, the towel beneath me warm from the sun, and whispered words even I didn't understand: "Don't stop." They weren't meant for him. They weren't even a command. They were a surrender, to being seen, touched, acknowledged. To finally existing in someone's eyes again. But the moment those words left my lips, time fractured. Silence swallowed everything. He froze. His hands withdrew slightly, as if he had touched something forbidden, because he had. Not my skin, but the truth I had spent so long concealing. I was hollow. Starved for affection, desperate to feel something real. I opened my eyes slowly, my breath trembling. Ethan's expression was confused, almost scared. Not of me, but of what he felt, or thought he felt. He had seen the shift too. Not because he intended to cross a line, but because we were both floundering in a house where connection had long since died. The beach faded away. The sun, the waves, the illusion of escape, gone. All that remained was this messy, painful awareness between us. The realization that something had changed, and we could never unsee it. The drive home was silent. The air inside the car thick with tension and unspoken emotion. Every passing mile dragged us closer to reality. 2 rules, 2 roles, to the haunting truth that the bond we'd felt was no longer simple. That night, I lay in my bed, alone, but not untouched by what had happened. Not physically, but emotionally. A line had been crossed, not by action, but by awareness. I had opened a door in myself I couldn't close. And now, nothing looked the same. Not my reflection, not my marriage, not even the way I saw my son. Not because of what he had done, but because of what I had allowed myself to feel. And that, perhaps, was the most terrifying betrayal of all. The next morning, the sun rose over a world that appeared unchanged, but I wasn't. Something fundamental inside me had shifted. The usual rhythm of life resumed, coffee, dishes, the sound of Ethan's footsteps on the stairs, but it all felt hollow. Like trying to rehearse a script when the stage had already burned down. Ethan entered the kitchen like a shadow, silent, thoughtful. He stood by the window, backlit by soft morning light. His gaze was quiet, unreadable, but it landed on me with the same intensity I remembered from the beach. My heart stuttered. "Ethan," I said, my voice trembling, an attempt to rebuild the boundary I should never have allowed to blur. "We can't," but my words trailed off. Not because he stopped me, but because I no longer recognized myself. In that still moment, I saw not a boy or even my son, but a mirror. A reflection of my own loneliness, my own aching need to be seen. It terrified me. What I had mistaken as connection was really an echo chamber of emptiness, bouncing between 2 people who had no one else to turn to. And as I stood there, desperate, ashamed, overwhelmed, I knew this wasn't about him. It never was. It was about the version of myself I had buried under years of neglect. It was about a woman who no longer knew where her worth began or ended. And who was willing, even for a moment, to grab at anything that looked like warmth. But this wasn't warmth. It was fire, and it would consume us both if I didn't stop it now. My world was in ruins, but the truth is, a ruin is only what remains when something has been abandoned. My life, my marriage, even my sense of self, they weren't destroyed in a single moment. They were hollowed out slowly, year by year, silence by silence. What happened at Serpent's Cove wasn't the beginning of the end. It was the moment the final match met the dry timber. The stories we tell ourselves about love and loyalty are tidy. But the lives we live are anything but. We build cages out of perfection, out of duty, and then wonder why we can't breathe. What happened wasn't the disease, it was a symptom. The true sickness was invisibility. Years of being unseen, untouched, unheard. A starvation of the soul so profound, it twisted something sacred into something we don't dare name. If this story stirred something in you, discomfort, anger, pity, or even uneasy recognition, subscribe. Share. Because the only way we make sense of the shadows is by naming them. And the only way we heal is by telling the truth, even when it burns. Folded hands, thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Your presence matters. Bell, tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. Loudspeaker, share this with someone who understands that sometimes, even survival leaves scars. Heart, let's keep telling the stories that others are afraid to voice. Bellhop, bell, subscribe for more true to heart confessional stories and hit the bell icon to never miss the next one. Disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction, crafted to explore the emotional aftermath of neglect, isolation, and forbidden longing within the boundaries of storytelling. It is not a reflection of acceptable behavior or a suggestion of real-life choices. Viewer discretion is advised.